No matter the time, morning, afternoon, or evening, any time is a good time to have coffee with the mayor. So let's join Mayor Steve Widmyer as he goes in search of the people, places, and events, both current and historic, that make our community unique.
Welcome to Coffee with the Mayor. I'm Steve Widmyer, and we're back. Woody, we haven't done a show for a little bit, but it's good to be back here. I'm with my co-host Woody McEvers, Council President, and today we have a great show. We have the honor of having Police Chief Lee White with us today, and thank you, Chief, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Why don't you, if you would, we'll start off, give us a little background on where you've been. I know you're from Arizona, born in Arizona?
Yes, sir.
Born and raised in Arizona. Maybe kind of give us a background of your law enforcement career and where you were before you came to Coeur d'Alene.
Well, as you said, I was born in Arizona. I went in the Marine Corps after high school and then began my career in law enforcement with the Mesa, Arizona Police Department. And in 22 years there, I either worked in or supervised just about every unit that you can possibly work in or supervise in law enforcement. I retired from Arizona as an assistant police chief, and then I was lucky enough to be hired here in the great city of Coeur d'Alene in September of 2014.
Yeah, great. And I know you've been here for just about 4.5 years now. What came the changes you've made in the time that you've been in Coeur d'Alene? Maybe kind of just touch on some of the things that you saw when you got here and how our police department has evolved for the last 4.5 years.
You know, I was impressed with the quality of men and women that we have in our police department as soon as I took the job, and they've really continued to impress me. I think the biggest change that we've made as an organization is really changing our culture and how we conduct policing. We kind of went from a model just being responsive, where someone calls 911 or calls for assistance, we would go and obviously respond, but there wasn't a lot of proactive community engagement or those sorts of things over and beyond that. And so I think that aspect of how we conduct business day in and day out has really changed the way that not only the public perceives our police department, but I think it's also helped in not only reducing crime, but also reducing the fear of crime. Our men and women have done such a phenomenal job. Since 2014, our crime rate, Part 1 crime rate, has decreased 44.62%, and that is remarkable. And we've seen a steady decrease in crime since 2014, but overall, since that time, a 44% decrease in Part 1 crime is absolutely amazing. The Part 1 crime rates are something that the federal government uses to not only talk about, just general societal impacts of crime and that sort of thing, but also for us, it kind of plays a role in the fear of crime. And so when we ask our folks to not only help reduce crime, we also have asked them to engage the community more. We've asked them to get out of their cars and talk to the shopkeepers and the people waiting for the bus stops and the people in the parks and the schools and things like that. And I think it's really paid dividends. Our community, it feels safer. The stats show that it is safer. And really, I think we've done a great job of improving our relationship with the community.
Mm-hmm. Chief, the one thing that when we're talking about crime stats that I always say is that we are a community of about 50,000 people, but we are actually much, much bigger than that. So we really can't compare ourselves of a community of 50,000 with another community of 50,000 that really doesn't have the influx of tourism that we have. I mean, we ballooned from a city of 50,000 in January to much, much bigger in June, July, and August. And so those stats, when you're comparing them to other cities of 50,000, you have to weigh that in as well. And I would imagine that kind of changes the dynamic of police work a lot too.
Sure, and really when we're looking at the stats, we only based our statistics on our population. We don't look, as you say, at the summer visitors that we get that really increases our population at least by a quarter, if not by half during some months. We have a huge influx of visitors that want to come and play in our wonderful community, and it does have an impact on public safety. There's obviously more traffic accidents, and there's more crime that comes with some of those activities. And once again, the men and women in the police department, they really stepped up. They've done a fantastic job in trying to keep that in check.
Yeah.
So along those same lines, Chief, I always remember this term we used to use, community policing. Is that kind of what you're talking about? I'm trying to understand how, if the police talk to the shopkeepers and interact with folks, how does that lower crime? Is it an awareness, or I'm trying to follow that path to get to the stats?
Sure. There's really two big things. Number one is if they feel more comfortable talking with police officers, sometimes it's kind of scary. They see someone in uniform and they think, geez, I did something wrong right off. And a lot of times it really isn't that at all. So if we can build those relationships and they feel comfortable talking with us, they feel comfortable calling us, and they see someone who appears to be suspicious or acting suspiciously, or they see a vehicle that doesn't belong in their neighborhood, or they see something, there's a child walking by themselves, and sometimes previously maybe they'd blow it off, but now they know that, Officer John's going to stop in the door in a few minutes, and they can communicate that to the officer, and he can, go off and talk to the child and help him find his way home, or those sorts of things. Okay. A lot of it is just relationship building. And some of it, though, as you hit upon, is the crime reduction piece. I brought a couple stats here. In last year, we had 157 automobile burglaries in the city of Coeur d'Alene. 114 of those vehicles were unlocked. They were unsecured. So basically 73% of all the auto burglaries that we had in the city of Coeur d'Alene last year were unsecured vehicles. And during our conversations with the shopkeepers and people we walk around, sometimes we'll give some crime prevention tips. We'll tell them, hey, how are you doing? We'll have the nice conversation. And by the way, you might want to take your purse into the store with you and lock your door. It might get stolen if you leave it out here in the parking lot. Just small things like that, they make a difference.
Huh.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
Chief, you know that school safety is paramount. One of the most important parts of your job, and we've seen really some very, very tragic and horrific situations in schools across the country. So we want to make sure that our schools in Coeur d'Alene are absolutely as safe as we can make them. And I know that you have gone up and beyond to reach out to our school district, and we have a great working relationship with our school district on school safety. Maybe talk about a little bit about school safety, the resources officers that we have there, and not only do I see that they're providing the safety, is that they really interact with the kids very well. So maybe we touch on our school program.
They really do, Mr. Mayor, you're spot on. Currently, we have 8 SROs. We have one here at North Idaho College, and then we have 7 we have 2 in one in each of the high schools, and then our middle schools, and then we have 1 elementary SRO that kind of floats between all the elementary schools, and the remainder are in our middle schools. We have a fantastic relationship not only with School District 271, but also here with North Idaho College. And as you said, not only do they play a deterrent type role, but really the interaction with the students on a daily basis, it happens frequently where a student will walk up to the SRO and tell us about something that concerns them. Sometimes it's criminal in nature, and really sometimes it isn't. Sometimes it can be one of those societal things that we can kind of just provide guidance on, a little bit of mentorship, if you will, to help someone choose the right path rather than maybe make that wrong turn that might end up in a criminal matter later on. Those relationships are huge.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because I go up and down 15th Street a lot, so I'm driving by lakes, and your resource officer will park his vehicle there, and I'm always very cognizant of speed as you're going by. So nothing makes a person check their speedometer more than if you see a police car. And so I immediately see that, I'm looking, okay, make sure I'm doing the speed limit.
Right. Chief, along those same lines, are you a believer in that students should have some knowledge of gun safety? Does that fit into that world at all from your perspective?
Sure, absolutely, especially here in Idaho. There's hunting rifles and those sorts of things in a lot of homes. The idea that we can help the students be safer at their own house just by some basic gun safety rules makes sense. If you see a gun, especially we talk about this with the elementary students. If you see a gun, don't touch it. Please go tell an adult type of thing. And some of that is just to ensure that they don't accidentally pick it up and we have an accident where they're otherwise untrained by their parent at home.
So that's in the elementary school, so that'll carry forward as they get older.
Yes, sir, hopefully.
That's good to hear. Okay.
Chief, one of the things in working with you now for 4.5 years I've known is that you are a stickler on policy, and you demand that your folks follow policy, and you've developed new policies and guidelines for your officers on how they interact with the public and all of the procedures that they go through. Maybe just talk about your viewpoint of policy and how you implement that with your team?
Sure. Well, there's an old saying in police work that culture eats policy for lunch. And so when I spoke earlier about our agency's culture and how it's evolved and how dynamic and really fantastic it is, I will tell you that, policy, it works as a guideline for our officers, but they already understand really what's expected of them and the professionalism that we demand that they show day in and day out when they're doing their jobs. But policy is very important. In just about every policy that we implement, we have to weigh the governmental purpose, the governmental interest versus the safety to the general public. So for instance, like our pursuit policy, for instance. Our pursuit policy is fairly simple. We weigh the need to immediately apprehend the suspect versus the danger that suspect may pose to the public if A, we chase them, or B, we let them go. And then, so it's kind of a decision that's made but might be altered depending on the dynamics of the situation. So for instance, we probably are not likely to chase someone to the ends of the earth if they ran a speeding or a stop sign or they were speeding or something like that. But if they're, someone who just shot somebody or an armed robber or something, there's a good chance that we would pursue them. Really, policy is something that we look at frequently. We have a group outside that gives us guidance on policy. They're a risk management group that, says, hey, these things are important now. You need to look at your policies, and here's some suggestions we make. And so we do make routine adjustments to our policy, and our men and women follow it.
Mm-hmm. Now, this is a question based upon me watching television shows, right?
The great trainer of police. Yes.
When you're talking about policy, and so for example, police pursuits in cars, and I hear it sometimes that sometimes you guys just back down.
Yes, sir.
Hey, you know what? This is too dangerous. We are not going to pursue this. Is there a time where you guys just say, you know what? We're going to get this guy, and we don't care what it takes. We're just after this guy. But because I know there's sometimes you say, no, we're not going to go, 110 miles an hour down this roadway. It's just too dangerous. We're not going to do it. We're going to catch the guy at a later time. But I would imagine there's another call where you're saying, you know what, we're pursuing this guy to the end.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, we do that weighing of the danger to the public versus the need for immediate apprehension. So let's say we have somebody who is more likely than not that person is going to commit additional crimes, especially crimes of violence upon the community if we were allow them to escape. Those people we will chase until they're apprehended. Conversely, like you said, if it's someone who's maybe they did a shoplifting and run off, there probably isn't that huge danger of violence to the community if we were to let that person go and catch them at a later date. I will tell you, the people that run from us, we still catch them. Whether it's the next day or the next week or whatever, we typically are really good at finding out who those people were, the driver of the vehicle and who the vehicle is registered to and those sorts of things, and can apprehend them at a later date. They rarely get away. They just may not go to jail today. And so that's the balancing act that we have to think about when we're deciding whether or not to pursue somebody. Is there an immediate danger to the community? If the answer is yes, then we're going to chase them. If the answer is no, then we will not chase them. If the answer is yeah, maybe, then maybe there's some other things that we can do to put in place to try to apprehend them, maybe without a pursuit.
Wow. We were thinking earlier today, we talked about some of the different things that you have, these different, canines and all these different internal groups that do different things. Can you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. We have a number of different specialty units. We talked about the school resource officer program a little bit ago. Our community action team has been a huge help to the police department in our efforts to not only fight crime but also establish ties with the community. The community action team is kind of our utility squad, if you will. So if we have a problem house in a neighborhood, they will go and find ways to address whatever problems we have there. And those problems can range from, somebody selling drugs in the house to just some code violations, for instance. They're really our utility squad. We use them frequently when, let's say, we're experiencing a large number of vehicle burglaries in a particular neighborhood. Well, that community action team might be used to solve that problem, whether it's through surveillance or just getting out knocking on doors and talking with neighbors, or using their contacts in the community to find out who might be responsible for those vehicle burglaries and pursuing it that way. They're basically a utility squad, and they do a phenomenal job. Our canine units, they are highly trained and very, very good at what they do. Everybody loves the police dogs, right? They're it's funny, every time we put a picture of a police dog on our Facebook page or on our website or something, the community just blows up. Everybody loves to to like those pictures and that sort of thing. But they do play a big role. They're fantastic. They're a big help to our officers out there on the streets.
Right. Does code enforcement, is that part of the utility squad?
Well, they have a separate function. They don't do some of the other aspects that the community action team might do. For instance, community action team might focus on the drug house by targeting the people who are selling drugs inside the house, where the code enforcement wouldn't do that. Although they do work cooperatively on a very regular basis. There's sometimes when a nuisance property, for instance, that CAT team might utilize code enforcement as another tool to help them be less problematic for the neighborhood.
Okay. So are they the ones that go after warrants? Warrants seem to be a pretty big part of the operation. You're chasing bad guys who haven't done what they're supposed to do.
Yes, the community action team will frequently go after people with warrants. They typically target, though, the people who have warrants involving crimes of violence or felonies that are a little bit more severe than some of the other, misdemeanor warrants and things like that. But I will tell you that almost daily, our patrol officers get a list of people who have active warrants. And if they have free time in their shift, when they're not either responding to emergency calls for service or establishing ties with the community, they might seek out those individuals to arrest them for the warrants.
I was wondering how you manage all that information coming in. Who sorts it and who makes the decision to go this way, that way, because you're busy all the time.
Typically, the patrol sergeants and the patrol lieutenants prior to each shift will look at the crime patterns that have occurred not only over the last week, but also over the last 24 hours and make adjustments in the manner in which our men and women are deployed for that given shift. There's an old adage in police work that random patrols equals random results. We would rather target the areas where we're experiencing crime or having some other issues and put the police officers where they're needed for that day. That doesn't mean that if you live in a neighborhood that is crime-free that you're never going to see an officer. It just means that we may not spend as much time there as we would where we're experiencing a high volume of crime at that particular time.
Okay. That makes sense, huh?
Yeah, it does. So Chief, we know that police work is very dangerous work at times, and you have led us through probably the darkest time in the history of the Coeur d'Alene Police Department with the loss of Sergeant Greg Moore, and you've also led us through the shooting of Patrol Officer Hadley. How do you deal with your guys when you're talking about the dangers of law enforcement and the potentials? How do you coach them through that? You coach us and led us through those two very difficult times. You're talking to your guys, what's the message you give them? Maybe just give us some insights, because that's got to be a tough deal.
Yeah, it can be rough. You're right, Officer Hadley was shot almost exactly 1 year ago today. And of course, we lost Greg in May of 2015. The officers understand from day one in the academy, even prior to that, when they go through the hiring process, and I sit across with each of them and have a talk about police work and what we expect of them if they were to be hired by our agency and what they're getting themselves into. I think they all, at least in their back of their minds, understand the dangers that come with police work. There might be some that think, oh, it's Coeur d'Alene, that stuff doesn't happen here because the area is smaller or less dangerous or something. And so helping them understand that, I think, takes place not only in the hiring process, but also in our training process. And really, after an event happens, there's a couple things that take place. Number one, we do continual training for our officers so they understand truly how to keep themselves safe and how to keep the community safe on a daily basis. We have an old adage in our, old now, it's been 4.5 years now, that every day is a training day for our department. Every day during briefing, not only talk about the crime trends that we talked about, but usually there's a policy review or an officer safety review that we talk about to help keep our officers safer. And then unfortunately, when something does happen, and it's not just the officers that get shot, we get officers that are injured in the line of duty fighting with the suspect or assaulted by a suspect on a semi-regular basis. The agency really rallies around. We have a fantastic team. I keep talking about culture of our department and the culture of the men and women that serve our public, and they are absolutely fantastic. That team environment, the internal support that we get, and the external support that we get from not only our community but also our elected officials is huge. It's not like in some communities where they think that they're out there on an island and the men and women in uniform are not thought of as highly as maybe some other professions because of some things that have transpired in their individual communities. Coeur d'Alene is a much different place. People here, they really support our law enforcement professionals, and we have fantastic support from obviously the mayor and council.
I was just going to give them a hard time on the training. We look at what the money you spend. It seems like everybody's always training, and we talk, and I go, "Is anybody on the streets?" And it makes some sense of what you just said. I question things all the time. I mean, you guys shoot a lot of ammo. It's ongoing, gun upgrades, things that I guess I just don't relate to. But as talking to you, kind of getting a feel of the guys and the job and what's important, it helps me, it helps me be gentler.
That training aspect is huge. Here's an interesting story. About a year and a half ago, I challenged our firearm unit. I told them that what I wanted was to have at least 95% of the men and women in uniform shooting 95% or better on the Idaho Post firearms qualification course. There's not a lot of agencies in the state that can boast that sort of thing. And they did it. They accomplished it. So that did two things. Number one, not only did we have a very proficient group of sworn officers with their firearms, but number two, it gave each of those individual officers fantastic confidence that they can hit what they aim at. If they're immediately presented with some life or death situation, they can act appropriately and take that little piece of the guessing game out. If you're confident in your skills and your ability, it does help you feel better about going to work every day and putting on a bulletproof vest and getting out there in a black and white and doing what we're asking them to do every day.
Kind of like flipping eggs. No, just kidding. When you learn a new skill, you got to do it over and over again. You can't stop. I think that's the other thing. I go, do they do this all the time? There's a certain amount of time that you guys put into firearms regularly doing it, right? So that you are proficient if you need to be.
Yes, sir. And it's not just that. We have in-service training every single month where every officer goes through at least 10 hours of various classes. Some of those are classroom where we talk about everything from dealing with the mentally ill to serving a order of protection to a pursuit policy, for instance. We talk about each of those things, and then there's also the hands-on aspect that we do every month, at least to try to. Maybe not this month when it's a whole bunch of snow on the ground, but usually when the weather's a little bit nicer, then we'll do some hands-on training as well to help them feel more comfortable in their skills.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So, Chief, one of the things that Woody and I hear a lot from our citizens is traffic. Not only that we hear a lot about how slow traffic is, but you have to deal with the traffic in making sure that people are going the speed limit, not running red lights, doing those kind of things. And how do you do that? How do you enforce all of the traffic laws in the city of Coeur d'Alene? And that's really an irritant of many citizens, particularly homeowners. Homeowners are saying, gosh, I've got these people, they're going by my house 40 miles an hour and it's 25 speed limit. And how do you help that situation?
Well, I will tell you, it's not just enforcement based. There is a large education component to traffic safety. I will tell you, probably 75% of the traffic stops we make end with a warning. And it's just an education piece. Do you understand that under these circumstances, what you were doing might endanger not only yourself, but the other motoring public out there because of these conditions or whatever? And really our goal here is not to write tickets. It's really to curb behaviors that might be otherwise dangerous to everybody out there. So a lot of times, stopping someone who's, for instance, running a stop sign or passing unsafely or something like that, or we see it frequently, they're trying to multitask. The person who's, trying to text on the phone while they're yelling at the kids and eating a cheeseburger and at the same time not riding with their seatbelt on, and stopping those people and saying, look, you have to pick one thing and do one thing well. Multitasking can be difficult. And by the way, what you're doing also violates Idaho code. You could receive a ticket, but we're hoping, after a little talk, that you stop doing what it was you were doing. And it does make a difference. We still have an issue here, especially during the busier months with traffic. We have people who, when we have inclement weather, still tend to drive too fast. We have people who still tend to tailgate and try to text and talk on their phone when they should be otherwise driving. And so it's a challenge. But once again, like I said, the goal is not to write a bunch of tickets. The goal is really to educate the public who might be otherwise breaking those traffic laws and try to gain compliance that way.
Traffic is all about safety.
Yes, sir.
Keeping people safe, making sure nobody's going to get in accidents, making sure that nobody's going to get hurt.
I like it.
Yeah.
I like it. Education.
Yeah.
Instead of, I'll stop yelling at people now.
Well, Chief, we, on behalf of Woody and myself, thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And speaking on behalf of myself and the council, as well as all of the citizens of Coeur d'Alene, we're darn proud of our police chief, and we're darn proud of our police force. And so we just want to thank you for all that you do, and keep up the good work.
Well, I will tell you, we couldn't do our job day in and day out were it not for an extremely supportive community and a very supportive mayor and council. You guys have been fantastic to our department, not only in terms of updating some of our aging equipment and vehicles and things like that, but also adding a few officers here and there. And the men and women of the police department, they thank you for that. I thank you for that. And once again, not just you guys, but also the 50,000 residents we have here. We really have a fantastic city.
Yeah, great. Thanks for being here
Thank you very
today,
much, sir.
Chief. Appreciate it. And we will see you next time on Coffee with the Mayor.
We hope you've enjoyed this edition of Coffee with the Mayor. Plan to join us for future programs where Mayor Steve Widmyer takes a break and sits down to discuss issues of community interest. We would like to take this chance to thank the following sponsors for their support: Rustler's Roost and Spectrum Cable. So brew a pot of your favorite blend and sit down with us next time when we once again have Coffee with the Mayor.